On Tuesday night, the board outlawed street parking with a gavel crack. By Wednesday morning, our cul-de-sac hummed with panic and muffled defiance. What they didn't expect. The quiet ledger in my desk drawer, the neighbors' stories, and a plan forged from quorum math and stubborn love on a deadline. The way Carol Voss said congested made it sound like a diagnosis. "Our lanes are congested," she declared, manicured finger tracing a line down the photocopied guidelines. "Emergency vehicles can't navigate, it's unsafe. Effective immediately, no street parking, driveways and garages only." 30 of us squeezed into plastic folding chairs under buzzing fluorescent lights. The smell of coffee, stale enough to apologize for it, drifted over the HOA clubhouse carpet. Carol wore pearls and the unassailable posture of someone who'd been practicing the phrase "effective immediately" in a mirror. I didn't stand to speak. I should have. I felt that later, like a held breath in my ribs. Then, I thought about Mara's night shifts at the hospital and the way she stumbled in at dawn, too tired to angle the Prius perfectly into our inexplicably narrow driveway when my truck was already there. I thought about Mr. Patel across the street who had converted his garage into a shrine for his late wife. Photos, fabrics, a light perpetually left on. I thought about Javier, who brought his contracting van home at dusk, paint speckles on his hands like confetti from a life making things whole. "We're just asking for compliance," Carol said, and the word compliance clicked like a seatbelt around our neighborhood. Some nodded, some scrolled. Most of us went quiet. By morning, the tow truck showed exactly how immediately meant. It came at 5:42 a.m., orange light sweeping windows like a slow-motion alarm. The winch grabbed the Corolla that belonged to Kiki on the corner, her grandmother's, the one with the dent she refused to fix because it reminded her that not everything needed to be perfect to be useful. Kiki ran out in a hoodie and bare feet, waving her arms, shouting, I'm moving it," and the driver stared at a clipboard as if it were a shield. When the car lifted anyway, the sound was less a mechanical whir than a statement of policy made metal. Mara had just gotten home, her scrub smelling faintly of antiseptic and coffee. She stood beside me at the window, her hair in a crooked bun. "Is this really happening?" she asked, as if we might still be asleep. "It's happening," I said, and my stomach sank as if it too was being hoisted onto a flatbed. By 9 a.m., the neighborhood group chat was a funeral procession of exclamation points, photos of bright orange warning stickers slapped onto windshields, copies of emails from the management company signed by someone named Tracy, who closed each one with warmly, "We're towing your car. Warmly, the rules changed at 10 p.m. last night. Warmly, we're here to help." I sat at the kitchen table with the HOA binder I hadn't opened since we moved in 3 years ago. It was a dull beige, the kind of color that pretends it doesn't have any power. Inside, it smelled like an office supply closet, toner and ambition. The bylaws were printed in Times New Roman, with margins that gave no quarter. I scrolled past the plat maps and landscaping rules, my finger tapping a rhythm of impatience. The garage requirements must fit 2 standard vehicles. The landscaping, no plants over 3 feet without approval. The paint palette with names like Morning Dune and Harvest Fog. And then, the section with the humdrum heading, Meetings of the Membership. It was written with the kind of opacity that makes people give up. Quorum percentages, notice periods, the phrase "in person or by proxy" making a cameo, and then vanishing into legal thicket. I read the paragraph again. In person or by proxy. Members may act by proxy. A special meeting may be called by a petition of no less than 10% of the membership. Votes shall be tallied at a duly noticed meeting. My heartbeat settled into a purposeful thud, the metronome of a plan. "Proxy," I said out loud, testing the weight of it. Mara knew that tone. It was the one I used when I found a seam in the world and felt like maybe, just maybe, I could tug. She sat across from me with a bowl of cereal and watched the change slide onto my face. "What?" she asked, cautious optimism cracking through her fatigue. "They can make rules at open meetings," I said, tapping the binder. "But the membership, the actual homeowners, can call a special meeting. We can vote to amend the rules. And We can collect proxies so the folks who can't be there can still vote. If we get enough, we can change it. Mara's spoon hovered. How many is enough? I did the math on a scratch pad, the pencil lead smudging under my fingers. We had 148 homes. 10% to call a meeting showed as an easy math problem, 15 signatures. But the quorum for the actual vote was higher, 40%, according to the bylaws, 59. And we needed a majority of votes cast in favor to amend the rules. If turnout was low, proxies could tip it. If turnout was high, they could carry it. I remembered Carol's laugh, polite and unyielding, when a man in the back last night asked if there could be exceptions. Courtesy passes for guests, short-term, allowances for families like Mr. Patel's or Kiki's. Exceptions create inconsistencies, she'd said. We're protecting property values. I looked at the towing notice magneted to our fridge, the fluorescent warning stark against our Christmas card photo, where we were all trying to keep our eyes open in the winter sun. Property values, I thought, as if that were the only value that mattered. At 10, I walked outside with the binder tucked under my arm like contraband. The cul-de-sac had the hush of a courtroom after a verdict. Lila next door, a kindergarten teacher with a smile that could diffuse a tantrum from 40 feet away, stood beside her car, fingers tracing the outline where an orange sticker had been. They got me at 3, she said. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to the sound of tape peeling. I'm going to fix it, I told her, and realized I sounded like I believed I could. She tilted her head. You and what army? I held up the binder. Proxies, I said, as if introducing a cavalry. Lila laughed, then caught the seriousness in my face. You're for real? I am. I need help. She looked down the street at Mr. Patel sweeping leaves across concrete already swept within an inch of its life. At Javier's van with its ladder and its new orange sticker curling at one corner, like a tongue of flame. At Kiki, sitting on her stoop with a mug clutched in both hands, eyes red and edges hard. I'll make a flyer, Lila said. I have a classroom printer that owes me. By noon, we had a map with tiny check marks scribbled. Across it, porches we'd hit, names we could count on, doors that would need a second try. I found a template for a proxy form online and rewrote it to match the language in our bylaws. I called Tracy at the management company and asked for clarification on quorum. She sounded surprised anyone read that far. 40%, she confirmed. And when I told her we'd be submitting a petition to call a special meeting, she paused long enough for me to imagine her covering the phone to mouth. We have a live one. You're entitled, she said finally. That word settled over the conversation like a dust sheet. Just make sure your proxies are signed and dated. Mara printed forms until the machine ran hot and then went to sleep like falling off a cliff. I sat at the table writing out a persuasive note that didn't sound like a manifesto. Dear neighbors, I began, and the words felt both too familiar and too formal. We weren't neighbors in the abstract. We were the people who lent each other sugar and jumper cables, who collected packages and watched dogs. We were the ones who watched each other's children learn to ride bikes around the curve where the crabapple tree shed blossom snow each spring. I crossed out, Dear neighbors, and wrote, We live here together. By 3, we knocked on the first door. It belonged to Mr. Green, who had lived on Ridge Hollow way before there was a hollow, when the developer's sign still promised a lifestyle. He opened the door a crack and peered at us over his glasses. If you're selling solar, he said, I've already bought the sun. I'm Alex, I said. We live next door to Lila. We're organizing to fix the street parking rule. He frowned. Rules are rules. If I told you rules could be voted on by all of us, I said, holding up the proxy, would you be willing to listen? He took the paper but didn't open it. Lila chimed in with her teacher voice, gentle, firm, impossible to wriggle past. Mr. Green, you know my sister visits with her twins twice a week. Which driveway do I put their minivan in? Mine or yours? He snorted, hiding a smile. Not mine. He opened the door wider. We stepped inside, the house a museum of dark wood and carefully placed lamps. He read the form, lips moving. When he reached the signature line, his pen hovered. "You really think you can win?" "I think we can be counted," I said. "And if enough of us are, then yes." He signed. When we left, the sun was slanting across the street, and for the first time since the gavel, the air felt less like a verdict and more like a vow. We had one signature out of 59 we needed. One down felt like a world shifting imperceptibly toward possible. We went door to door, story to story. We learned that Ash's mother was moving in after her knee surgery and would need the closest parking possible. That Nate and Priya had been trying for a baby for years, and their garage was full of crib, parts, and hope. That the woman in the blue house at the end of the cul-de-sac was a firefighter who had to leave at all hours, and the only way she could do it fast was to park on the street. At 7, we reached Carol Voss's house. Her porch, light clicked on before we could knock. As if we had tripped a perimeter, the door opened and there she was. Pearls, posture, a glass of white wine reflecting the porch bulb. "Alex," she said, smiling without warmth. "I wondered when you'd come." "We're calling a special meeting," I said, holding out the petition. "We're collecting proxies." She glanced at the paper and then at us. "You can try," she said, one eyebrow rising like a drawbridge. "But people don't care enough to show up." Behind her, somewhere inside the cool silence of her home, a clock began to chime. 8 notes, patient, confident. Lila stood beside me, our stack of forms suddenly heavy, suddenly sacred. "Maybe they didn't," I said. "But they do now." 2 numbers looped my dreams. 59 for quorum, 1 for the tow truck at dawn. By noon, we had signatures and enemies. By night, a management email set a date and a trap. If proxies were paper shields, we'd learn how sharp paper could cut. Before anyone blinked, they changed rules. The morning after Carol's porch light smile, our kitchen became a war room made of coffee stains and paper clips. The HOA binder sat open to meetings of the membership, a yellow highlighter like a tiny sun bleeding across margins. Lila brought over a stack of fresh copies, the ink still warm, the phrase "We live here together" printed at the top like a banner someone could carry into a better life. Mara moved like a ghost through all of it, half rested, half furious, refilling, mugs applying band-aids to paper-cut fingers, anchoring the room with that gentle competence she wore like scrubs. "Tell me what I can do before I crash," she said. "Address labels," I said, because we were swimming in names and needed them to feel less like strangers and more like a choir. "And tell me if I'm being dramatic." Mara leaned on the counter and watched me triangulate numbers with a pencil. "If you're being dramatic," she said, "then good. Drama changes things when polite doesn't." By noon, the petition to call a special meeting had 19 signatures, the ink strokes wobbly from porch railings and hurried stoops. Tracy, after some pin-dropping quiet, had emailed back with instructions. "Deliver the petition to the management office by 5 p.m. for verification." The special meeting, she wrote, would be set for 14 days from the petition date to comply with notice requirements. Warmly. We delivered it like a treasure we didn't trust pirates not to intercept, driving to the office with Lila riding shotgun, and the binder buckled in as a joke that wasn't really a joke. The lobby smelled like laminate and lemon cleaner. Tracy had a floral scarf and the practiced patience of someone paid to withstand storms. She took our petition in both hands and scanned the top page with a small, surprised hum, as if someone had handed her proof the neighborhood was awake. "You'll get notice by email," she said, "and postal mail, to satisfy notice requirements." "Can you confirm the quorum numbers in the notice?" I asked, the pencil in my pocket itching to annotate. "And that proxies will be accepted?" Tracy smiled in a way that might have been sympathy. "It'll all be in there. Which is to say, maybe." On the way home, we saw Kiki walking along Ridge Hollow with a duffel bag and a brittle set to her jaw. The impound lot had lifted her grandmother's Corolla for $285 and a lecture. "He told me," she said, voice shaking, "that rules are rules. For my grandmother's car, Alex." Lila slipped her arm through Kiki's. "Come on," she said. "We're going to give them a rule of our own." That afternoon, our living room became a staging ground where stories turned to ink. Javier came by with a stapler that had held his contracting business together in the recession and now seemed determined to hold together a neighborhood. Mr. Patel brought samosas wrapped in foil and told us in a soft, steady voice that his wife had loved this street most in May when the blossoms fell. "We should put that in the rule," Lila said. "In the rule?" Javier asked. "In our rule," I said. And out loud, because saying it made it more likely, I added, "We're not just overturning theirs, we're replacing it with something sane." So we drafted. Lila typed while I read the bylaws again and again until the legalese resolved like a magic eye picture. Sophia from 2 cul-de-sacs over, an attorney with a new baby and a ponytail she could make lethal with a single look, slid onto our couch and moved commas like chess pieces. We landed on language that felt simple enough to live in: street parking. Permitted except during posted street sweeping hours and snow emergencies. No parking within 15 feet of hydrants within 25 feet of stop signs, or in a manner that obstructs driveway sightlines. Courtesy passes for guests, caregivers, and contractors valid for 72 hours. No parking that blocks. The flow of emergency vehicles to be determined by the local fire code, not a whim. Sophia underlined fire code and tapped her pen. "Anchor to standards they can't twist back at you," she said, "and appoint a proxy holder by name. It needs to say exactly whose hands the vote lives in." "You," I said, pen leaping. "If you're willing." She snorted. "I was hoping you'd say that. But your name should be on most. It's your face at the door. People trust their own shoes." At 6 p.m., the neighborhood inbox chimed as if a bell tower had woken. Notice of special meeting. The subject line contained the date, the time, the clubhouse address, and a little grenade near the end. Proxies must be executed on the association's official form. Attached was a PDF with a logo at the top and a line in tiny print. "General proxies will not be accepted. Proxies must reference the specific meeting and agenda item." Lila let out a low whistle. Trap. I called Tracy while the room went quiet. She answered on the second ring, professional brightness brittle around the edges. "Oh, that," she said when I asked. "The board wants uniformity." "The bylaws don't require a specific form," I said, tapping the line I'd read so many times it felt memorized. "They say dated, signed, and designating a proxy holder." "True," she said, and I could hear the sheets of paper sliding under her fingers. "But the board has adopted an official proxy for this meeting. It clarifies intent." "It narrows it," Sophia called, loud enough for the phone to catch. "Tell them general proxies are valid unless the bylaws forbid them. They don't. We'll mirror their form and meet them on the field they drew." Tracy sighed. "You're not wrong," she said, which in Tracy language sounded like a confession whispered to the ceiling. "If you submit signed, dated proxies that reference this meeting, we have to honor them. Just make sure your people understand what they're signing." We've already had calls. When I hung up, Mara, who had woken somewhere during the email barrage and was now curled in the armchair with a blanket and her observant eyes, said, "So we sprint." We sprinted. We rebuilt the proxy overnight. Sophia cut and pasted like a surgeon, aligning our form with theirs so exactly that if you squinted, the only difference was whose name the line for proxy holder suggested. We designated me, Sophia, and Lila in rotation, a 3-pronged fork in case one of us caught the flu, or a flat tire, or an ill-timed crisis of heart. By 9 the next morning, our little army fanned out with clipboards and umbrellas against a nuisance drizzle. People opened doors in slippers and hoodies and blazers and bathrobes, with toddlers clamped to hips and dogs trying to escape. The stories came to the porch before the pens did. The firefighter from the end of the cul-de-sac, whose name I learned was Tamsin, signed with a weary flourish. "I want a world where my truck can get down a street and my niece can visit without getting fined," she said. Both things can be true. Ash signed for himself and promised one from his mom when she woke up without the anesthesia haze. Nate and Priya pressed their hands to the paper like a vow, whispering about their garage being a museum of someday. Mr. Green, who had signed first and was now apparently our backbone, stood at the end of his walkway like a bouncer and waved neighbors over to us as if he were conducting traffic. He wore a cardigan like armor. We lost a few. A realtor with a gleaming smile said, "Rules protect investments," and shut the door gently, as if he could be kind and firm at once. A couple who had never answered their door finally did and told us in polite, level tones that they feared retaliation, which told me everything about the neighborhood we were trying to live in and everything about the one we were trying to make. At noon, a different kind of storm rolled in. Letters. Violation notices, like orange stickers had grown legs, walked into our mailboxes. They listed fines for overnight street parking, each line a new little cut. The group chat lit. Lila, bless her, replied with a photo of our proposed rule and a caption, "Help us replace this with this." At 5, a pickup near the clubhouse had a flat. The owner, Deshaun, new on our street, whose laugh had already made me wish we'd moved sooner, sat on the curb, head in hands, waiting for a tow. He lifted his head when he heard sirens, and we all turned, seeing the ambulance first as light, then sound, then need. It slowed at the corner, wheeled in, and for a heartbeat I thought about the meeting notice. Emergency vehicles can't navigate. As if the board had scripted this moment for proof, but the ambulance slid past the curb emptiness like a knife through silk. It wasn't the space that caught it. It was the crowd, us, a knot of neighbors who drifted into the street to help with a tire and found ourselves in the path of urgency. We stepped back, cleared a lane, and the ambulance moved through, Tamsin waving her hand to guide them like a conductor. It stopped at the blue house. An elderly man's face appeared in the window, then vanished as the EMTs disappeared inside. For 10 minutes we stood shoulder to shoulder, listening to the thud and hum of life being negotiated. When they wheeled the old man out, awake and complaining about the football game, we all breathed. The ambulance went. The street reknitted itself and Deshaun's jack popped the pickup higher. "If anyone asks," he said, grinning crookedly, "we've got proof the only obstruction around here is fear." The last 48 hours felt like 10 days stitched together. We logged proxies like pilgrims pressing beads on a string, 21, 34, 46. I dreamed numbers and woke to names. The second night Mara curled into my side, her exhaustion in the shape of a person. "I don't need you to win," she whispered into the dark. "I need you to show them what we look like." On the morning of the meeting, rain poured like a cheap special effect, bouncing off sidewalks, turning our cul-de-sacs into reflective versions of themselves. I drank coffee and watched water eddy at the curb, thinking about how easily a street holds what you pour into it. Cars, water, anger, hope. At 6 p.m., the clubhouse smelled like damp wool and determination. Carol stood at the front in a navy blazer, the pearls the same, the smile calibrated. 2 other board members flanked her, Tom, who always looked like he just remembered something important, and Brenna, who had a hair clip shaped like a leaf and a pen poised like a tiny spear. Tracy checked people in, one eye on the sign-in sheet, one on the door. We had 62 proxies in a folder I held like a baby bird. Sophia had a crisp blazer and a soft voice that could slice marble. Lila wore red, because red doesn't whisper. Mr. Green wore the cardigan again, this time with a tie. Kiki's grandmother came with her cane and sat in the second row, the dented Corolla key on a bright lanyard around her neck like a medal. "Membership check-in," Tracy called, and a line formed. She counted. Out loud, like a kid's game, with adult consequences. 21, 36, 41. The room filled. The door kept opening. The rain slowed and then stopped, the windows beating with droplets that refracted us into 100 small versions. When I handed Tracy our proxies, she flipped through them, the papers making a sound like wings. She paused at page 17. "This one doesn't list the meeting date," she said. "It says the special meeting noticed for September 23rd regarding the street parking rule." I replied. "The bylaws don't require the exact timestamp." Carol approached, standing, so close I could smell her perfume, something floral, expensive, determined. "We'll set aside any that do not precisely comply," she said, and smiled the way a cat might if it could. Sophia stepped in. "No," she said, the syllable like a gavel of our own. "Your own notice uses regarding. Your board's form is not required by the bylaws. These are valid. They designate a proxy holder, are signed and dated, and reference the agenda item and meeting. If you want to disenfranchise your own members, say it into the mic." Tracy looked between us. Her face flickered with something human. Embarrassment? Resolve? Then she nodded, polite but real. "We'll accept them," she said, and I could have hugged her except that I wanted to keep her neutral. Carol's smile thinned. "We will validate signatures," she said. "We cannot count what?" "We cannot confirm." "As you must," Sophia answered, and for a second I loved the law like an umbrella. The clock at the back of the room clicked toward 7. The rain cleared as if the sky had decided to eavesdrop. Chairs scraped. People leaned forward. Tracy whispered to a woman with a laptop, "Our teller," and pointed to the stack. She glanced up at the room and then down at the sign-in sheet and began to count with her finger. "Quorum requires 59 members present in person or by proxy," Carol said into the mic, her voice smooth as polished wood. "If we do not meet quorum, this meeting will be adjourned." At the table, the teller's finger tracked the names like a pilgrim mapping stars. 52, 54. Lila squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles cracked. 57. The room held its breath so completely that even the rain dared not tap. 58. The ER teller glanced toward the door as if a 19th century courier might rush in with parchment. Nothing. I felt the floor tilt, the room a ship with one more wave to ride. Then the door opened. Tamsin ducked in, shaking water from her jacket, and behind her came Ash's mom on a walker with tennis balls on the legs, and 2 teenagers who lived in the rental at the curve and never, ever came to things, and Priya with Nate holding an umbrella like they'd shared a spine, and Deshaun rubbing grease off his hands with a rag. They signed. Tracy counted out loud and then, uncharacteristically, grinned. 59, she said. "Quorum is met." Carol's smile didn't move. The gavel in her hand looked suddenly small. She lifted it, tapped wood. "Very well," she said. "We will proceed to the vote." Quorum clicked like a seatbelt. The room leaned forward. We had proxies stacked like prayers and a rule drafted in ink that smelled like rain. But the gavel didn't care about hope. It cared about counts, commas, and courage. Before we won, someone had to bleed past into a microphone. Carol's gavel found the wood, a small, tidy sound that asked us to believe in it. "The special meeting of the Ridge Hollow Homeowners Association will come to order," she said. "The agenda is as noticed: discussion and possible action regarding street parking." Sophia rose. She didn't wait for permission. She simply stood and became the tallest thing in the room. "Madam President," she said, "I move to repeal the emergency street parking ban adopted last Tuesday and replace it with the member-drafted rule circulated to the membership and displayed on that screen." Every head swiveled. The rule, ours, glowed. On the projector, straightforward as a good promise. Permitted except during sweeping and snow. Fire code distances. Courtesy passes for guests, caregivers, and contractors. No blocking driveways. No cars abandoned. Safety measured by standards, not moods. Carol's mouth made a careful O. "We will first have discussion," she said, clipped. 3 minutes per speaker. Tamsin stood. "I'm a firefighter," she said, her voice low and carrying. "Here's what stops us. Cars parked opposite each other on streets under 24 feet wide, cars too close to hydrants, blind corners, and panic. What doesn't stop us? A sedan tucked by a curb with a courtesy pass on the dash. If you want safety, follow the code. If you want to pretend, keep towing grandmothers." Laughter cracked into applause that died when Carol tapped her gavel. "Please, decorum," she said, a word that sounded like a glass you weren't allowed to touch. A man in a fitted blazer, Eric, the realtor who'd shut his door on us, stepped to the mic. "Property values are fragile," he said, teeth as bright as a listing photo. "Crammed streets look like neglect. Buyers drive through and they see a mess. Buyers drive through, Mr. Green muttered, not bothering to approach the mic. But we live here. Kiki took a turn she hadn't planned to take. She gripped the mic like a rope thrown from a boat. My grandmother's car, she began, voice shaking. It cost me $285 to get it back, not just money. Dignity. That car is how I take her to the doctor and the grocery and the pier she likes on Tuesdays. You can put a number on a towing fee, but not on that. It got quiet enough to hear the copy machine in the office next door churn in its sleep. Brenna, the board member with the leaf clip, stepped forward. We didn't do this to hurt anyone, she said. I live on a curve where people fly through like they're late to outrun their own lives. I've watched near misses with kids on scooters. I wake up at night and hear sirens and think, could they get to us? That's what I voted on. Fear, not power. Then fix the thing that's dangerous, Lila said. She didn't bother with the mic. She had a teacher's throat. Speeding, blind corners, add mirrors, add a stop sign. Don't take away our ability to care for each other. My turn came because sometimes words are a kind of heart you hand over. I walked to the mic with our rule in my pocket and Mara's handprint warm on my wrist. We live here together, I said, and the phrase felt like a kite catching wind. We're not asking for chaos. We're asking for something that looks like us. That lets a contractor park his van while he paints your kitchen. That lets a nurse come home at dawn and not have her car hoisted into the air for coming home tired. That lets Mr. Patel keep his garage the way he has since he lost his wife, without being forced to turn it back into cold storage for sheet metal. If the board's goal was safety, this is safer. If the board's goal was control, this gives us dignity without surrender. Carol tightened her lips, then surprised me by approaching the mic herself, not the dais. She stood at the floor level, among us, and set the gavel down like an admission. When I was 12, she said, and already the room softened, my brother had an asthma attack. Our street, another HOA, another set of rules, was jammed on one side with graduation parties, and a truck parked one wheel into the lane on the other side. The ambulance scraped a mirror on the way through. The EMT who stepped out cursed under his breath, and the neighbor who owned the truck told him to watch his tone. My brother was fine. He is fine. But I've never forgotten watching that mirror pop like a knuckle. I suppose I've been trying to unhear that cursing ever since. She looked at Tamsin. You're right. The code is the code. I wanted more certainty than it gives. Maybe I built a wall because I couldn't stop seeing a narrow street as a throat closing. The room exhaled like it had been holding a crowd-sized breath. It didn't absolve the tows, the fines, the way the new rule had dropped like a guillotine, but it took the teeth off the conflict and replaced them with something shaped like grief. Sophia returned to the mic. We can write a rule that honors both the dignity of our lives and the requirements of safety. That's what's on the screen. Tom, the other board member, slid his glasses up his nose. And enforcement? He asked, wary. If we pass this, who enforces? How do we ensure people don't ignore hydrants or park at corners? The same way you enforce the pool rules and the architectural guidelines, Sophia said. Through notices that explain, not threaten. Through fines that fit the behavior, not the mood. Through signs anchored to the fire code. And through trust. This is a community, not a checkpoint. Carol picked up the gavel and set it down again. We'll proceed to vote, she said. Written ballots. Mark repeal and replace or retain board rule. Proxies will be cast by their designated holders. The teller table became a stage. Tracy and the woman with the laptop handed out ballots like communion. Pens clicked. Proxies were sorted in 3 stacks. Mine, Sophia's, Lila's. I felt their weight like an odd fluttering animal in my hands. I marked each proxy vote as instructed. Repeal and replace. My pen a metronome. People lined up to slide folded paper into a clear plastic box that had once collected suggestions for a Halloween potluck theme. They began to count. Some meetings are battles. This one felt like a surgery. Numbers were read out, slow and precise. Retain, the teller said, placing a tally mark. Replace. A mark in a different column. Outside rain started again. light as fingertips on glass. Replace, replace, retain, replace. At 25 to 18, Tom swallowed. At 38 to 27, Brenna's shoulders slumped and then straightened as if she'd made a separate interior decision. At 46 to 35, Carol looked at the ceiling, took a breath and nodded once as if to herself. Then the board's proxies came out, a neat bundle with a rubber band. A few of theirs had the faint coffee rings of a long afternoon. Retain, the teller announced, and the retain column grew. Retain. Retain. Our lead shrank, a tide pulled by another moon. 50 to 48, 51 to 51. Lila squeezed my arm so hard the world came into focus at the point of contact. The room was silent the way a held scream is silent. The last of the board's stack was counted. 52 to 51, replace, the teller said, and for a heartbeat the entire room stood on one foot. I looked down at the final handful of proxies in my folder. Ours, not yet counted, the ones we'd collected from people who had said they couldn't make it because of shift work or anxiety or rain. I slid them forward. Replace, the teller said. 1. Replace. 2. Replace. She began to count in fives, chalking lines. 60, 61, 62. The last ballot, an in-person one from a woman I'd never met who worked night stocking shelves and had slipped in during her dinner break, tipped the number into a place that felt like relief drawn on a map. 63 to 51, the teller said, turning to Tracy. Tracy took the tally sheet, double-checked the math, and then, looking not at Carol but at us, announced, by a vote of 63 to 51, the motion to repeal and replace passes. If I could bottle a sound, it would be the way a neighborhood makes a yes. It's not just cheers. It's chairs scraping like they'd been tense and could finally sit back. It's a sob from the second row, Kiki or her grandmother. I didn't turn to look because the sound itself was the person. It's a pen dropped, a slow clap that turns into many, a laugh from Mr. Green that made him look 20 years younger, Mara's little gasp like she'd suddenly let go of a weight she didn't know she was holding. Carol picked up the gavel and did something that in any other world would have been small. She smiled, really smiled, and brought the gavel down. The motion carries, she said. We will update the association's rules immediately. Enforcement of the prior rule is suspended. Fines issued this week are waived and will be refunded. We will work with the fire department to post code-compliant signage at hydrants and corners, and to add a stop sign at the curve. Her eyes found Tamsin. And we will ask for your help. After the room broke into pockets of relief, people hugged with the cautious joy of those who had seen victory go sideways before and were still remembering how to celebrate. Tracy handed me a form, a boring official thing amending the rules and regulations, and I signed as the proxy holder whose votes had done the lifting. The paper felt less like authority and more like a strange kind of forgiveness stamped in Times New Roman. In the hallway, Carol waited for me, pearls catching the fluorescent light like tiny moons. You were organized, she said, which I recognized as her version of you were right. I would like to ask you, and Ms. Sophia and Ms. Lila, to chair a work group on traffic safety with us. Us, I repeated because the word stuck. Us, she said, and then quieter. I don't want to be the villain. I want to be the person who never hears that mirror pop again. Then come to the curb with us, I said. Let's stand where the street meets the lives. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist that made the parking lot lights halo. We walked to our cars, which would stay where we'd left them, a mundane miracle. Mara tucked her arm into mine. You showed them, she said, what we look like. What we look like, I echoed. The phrase felt like it would keep a certain kind of dark at bay. By the weekend, courtesy passes printed with the HOA logo were slid under doors with a note that didn't say warmly, but did say, welcome. Hydrant curbs bloomed red with fresh paint. A temporary stop sign sprouted at the curve. Kids ricocheted their scooters off it as if testing its resolve. Javier parked his van in front of a house he was mending and waved like he'd been invited. Mr. Patel's garage stayed full of light. Kiki took her grandmother for a drive to the pier and came back smelling like salt and sugared dough. On Sunday night, I stood in our cul-de-sac and watched the street hold what we poured into it. Cars, scattered leaves, laughter, the quiet glow of windows. The ledger in my desk, the one from the first day that held names and reasons and a math I could believe in, sat closed. Not because it wouldn't be needed again, but because for now, the neighborhood had written itself somewhere less fragile than paper, somewhere like memory, somewhere like law. We had rewritten a rule. It is not the same as fixing everything, but it was the first true sentence of a new story. We live here together. And together, finally, we were allowed to arrive. Home,